how to revive, rescue, or reinvent a failing convention or not. I just want to mention that I'm kind of on the or not side at this point in my life. So I'll let the other people introduce themselves and we can start.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Catelynn Cunningham, and I'm currently the vice chair for Heliosphere in New York. But my previous experience was working on the tail end of Unicon, which did not survive. So that was a long story.
I'm Russ Miller. I'm from the Dallas area. I run FinCon, and we've got. Oh, okay. Yeah, that'll work. We're switching mics. Thank you. Yeah, I got it. Yes, thank you. So we are. Okay, I'm Russ Miller, Dallas area, FinCon, and I've worked on our own. I founded FinCon. It's about 17 years ago. I've also worked on some SMOFCon and NASFIC, and I've got a couple of stories which we can get into in a bit.
Okay, so I mentioned I'm on the kind of or not part. My home convention is BosCon in Boston, and WorldCons in general. As far as WorldCons go, I think a lot of us are getting very tired of coming in and rescuing bits and pieces of WorldCons or other things. You know, things go wrong, and the Traveling WorldCon committee comes and does its thing and gets stuff together again. Maybe it's time that we stop doing that. Maybe it's time that we start getting conventions that can handle their own problems, or if they can't handle their own problems, they don't do the convention instead of depending on people at the last moment to fix things. And I know it's tradition, and it's the right thing to do in many cases, is to help out friends and to fix things. But I think it's gone on too long, and it's people are getting very sloppy because, well, if they mess up, somebody else will fix it for them. And I've been a fan for years, and maybe I'm just getting old and tired. But I think that's time to stop that. So why don't we start off by talking about, I guess, rescuing, and opposed to anything else, okay?
I think that the important thing about rescuing is to find out why the convention is having a problem, because sometimes the loss of staff or something, and it might be something that there is a possibility of fixing somewhat painlessly, that if you do some recruitment or something and try to bring in some new people and things like that. But I think one of the times that it doesn't work is that a convention just gets really stuck in one place, and they really need to make some changes, and they're just resistant to the change completely. And you just constantly are hearing well, this is the way we've always done it. And one of the kiss of death to me is when you ask somebody, why do you do it that way? And they just get pissed off at you, and they can't answer the question. And it just is a valid question. Okay, you do something this way. Why? What was the reasoning for doing it that way? And, is there any reason why you can't change it? And what's happened with some of the older conventions is they really don't know why they are continuing to do something that way. And okay, then let's think about it. But a lot of times you just get pushback, and that's not a good place, because you should be able to justify your process.
Russ?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that, to your point, talking about WorldCon specifically, which I don't have that much experience with, it sounds like it's preparation. It's probably, to a certain extent, it's assumption. Here's a micro example of that. Okay, on my staff one time, I had a hospitality person, and every meeting I would say, everything good? You got your team ready? Is everything good? Yes, it is. Okay, so you got a team? Yes, I do. Have you got your list of things to do? Yes, I do. You're good. Yes, I'm good. Every single time. Came convention time, everything failed. She didn't have a team. She didn't have a plan. She thought she did, and she assumed that she did, but what she didn't have was the good pass along knowledge from the last person that had done it, saying you're going to have this and this and this. And she got mad and left on Sunday afternoon and just gone. She just walked out. So part of it is, I think, if you take that and apply it to a convention, especially one that pops up and says, okay, we want to come and run a WorldCon. We know this and this and this. The assumption is that they really do know what they're talking about and that they really are prepared, but they may not be. And through lack of communication, whatever, the knowledge just isn't there. And so whoever needs to come along and try to fix that goes, we thought you knew what you were doing. Oh my gosh. But I think it's two-way communication, and it's really sitting down and explaining something to someone and saying, okay, when you say you're ready, let's walk through that. What 2 or 3 things are you actually doing? And maybe going into a little bit more depth, and maybe that can help stave off some of those issues.
Yeah, there's a difference between longstanding conventions that happen in one place here and traveling conventions like WorldCon or one-shots and things like that. I would say, especially on the WorldCon one-shot thing, if people want to run a convention, they should know what's involved. They should ensure that they mostly have staff, or at least they're trying to recruit the staff, and they have some chance of getting the staff. Because trying to run a one-time convention, there's just so much stuff going on that you need help from outside.
Yeah.
I mean, even on the standalone conventions, the long-term conventions, it's possible that for some reason, staff has been dropping off. I think a healthy convention, people are circulating from one part of the convention to another over a period of years. And I think you can tell an unhealthy convention by the fact that the same people are involved in the same thing year after year. And that, I think, is unfortunately where my local convention is. Yes, maybe the people who are in that one place are the best people at the job. And, you always want the best people at the job to do a specific thing. But if they've been doing it year after year after year, nobody else gets to be the best person at that job. So sometimes you got to take risks in order to keep your convention healthy. And if you're depending on those same people year after year after year, you end up with 10 people perhaps running the whole convention. They're the only people really doing things. And it's very hard to get other people involved. Even though some people will do stuff at con, they'll gopher, they'll sit at a table, they're not the ones who are really put together the convention. Now, small conventions, 300 maybe to 500 people, I would guess that would be small. You could probably get away with that. It would be hard, but you can get away with that. Once you're running bigger than that, say 5 to 1,500 or so, you really need more people planning the convention and working on it. Because otherwise you're going to get the 5 or 6 people who really care, burning out or tired or disgusted or just leaving. And then where's the convention at? So under those circumstances, by the way, I would sort of say it's time to end the convention. Instead of massive work to try to fix this convention, let's just say we've had enough. We've had a good 70-year or 10-year run with this convention. Let's end it when we're still good, as opposed to trickle off to a sort of sad ending like the LunaCon or whatever.
One of the things in this particular case, when you have the same people doing the same job over and over, what you see is people think it's theirs, and they're really resistant to training anyone else, because then they're afraid they're going to get replaced and where they'll be. It really is important to really encourage the people that the stakeholders to try to pass on their knowledge to the younger people for a whole long list of reasons, because that's what's going to keep your convention going. Because the status should be that you're a subject matter expert and that you can communicate that expertise to other people. And if you, and that's what's going to keep a convention going and thriving. In a small convention, the same people doing the same job over and over is not necessarily the kiss of death, but eventually it's going to catch up with you. And it's worth it to consider moving people around. In a previous convention I worked in, I always try to move my staff around. It seems in sci-fi harder to do that because people really just really hang on to the one thing they're doing.
So how would you imagine that would be the best way to fix that situation if you saw a convention that was, like you were saying, where there was a lot of, you know, people that were still in the same jobs, and it was killing it because people wouldn't let go? How do you jump in and fix that?
One of the ways you can do it is by assigning a new assistant. Take the assistant, you know, if the senior person in that job is the expert, move somebody else into that area, a younger person or somebody else to learn that area, so that way you start having some cross knowledge. But by putting a second person in there and making kind of clear to the senior person that it's a really important goal that this newer person learn the area.
We'll be taking comments later on, towards the end of the convention, not now, of the program item, not now. Thank you. There is a kind of an issue that people don't necessarily want to give up their area. And maybe they are the best person for their area. I've been doing program for Boscone for far too long in many ways. I'm very good at it. I don't like doing other things at conventions particularly well. I've done Con Suite, I've done the art show, done a whole bunch of stuff, but the one I do my best at and I like the most is program. But I'm aware that other people need to do it. Like, what if I die tomorrow or something like that? So, you know, you find a couple of people with luck you can train and alternate off, like running it or, you know, doing things like that. That's difficult. You got to kind of cut your ego. Sometimes you just got to sort of say, I just can't do it. Somebody else has to do this, or I want to do something else. It's not easy, but I think it's one of the only ways you can really keep the convention going. We have an interesting issue up in Boscone that we have up at Boston in general, is we have another big convention up there that is possibly failing. Okay, if it fails, it would be very nice if, say, Boscone, that they inherits new people. But then you have another issue, is those other people have a different corporate culture and possibly a different aim. Do you help the convention, the surviving convention, by changing it? How much can you change it? Well, and still retain it is your specific convention with your brand, whatever you want to call it. So that's another thing. How can you change your convention if you need to reinvent it, revive it?
I think bringing in younger, newer people is probably the best way to do it. You've got to get a new perspective on the entire situation in order to reinvent something. I don't think you can do it with the same crop of people.
The Boston situation, ironically, I'm somewhat involved with because I had been working in that convention for several years. And actually, one of the problems they're having is, we were talking about this earlier today, is they're having a brain drain. A lot of the older, more knowledgeable people have been encouraged to leave the convention, and there's a lot of newer people. And one of the things you're seeing is that they're just repeating the same mistakes that they were saying there was a problem with, that the older people were doing, or the, you know, talking older simply in age, so we're clear, you know, the more experienced people, seasoned people, like, yes, was there mistakes made? Absolutely. But now you're seeing the same mistakes being repeated because nobody learned, you know, so it's a sad situation. Before my own convention, before I started working on my own convention, it was my favorite convention. And it's really sad, you know, to see some of what's going on. And I do hope they manage to pull it out. But there is more than one issue going on at this point.
To, I think, clarify, Catelyn's convention that she works now, Heliosphere,
Yeah.
is a reinvented convention after Lunacon fell apart, more or less. It
Well-
got old, it went senescent, it stopped being a exciting convention. I
What
used to go to
ended up-
Lunacon, and I stopped going about 15 years ago because it
A
was
lot of people think that that's what happened, that
Nope.
we formed but we were the newer people that were Lunacon. We were part of, somebody made the announcement that they were discontinuing Lunacon, and a lot of people, because it was such a long running convention, didn't want that to happen. And so a group I was not part of at that point, tried to reform it. I came in after like the second meeting or something, for the reform. And for various reasons, that didn't work out with a lot of people. There was a big political mess. And so a couple of us left and just completely independently started another convention. We already knew that Lunacon was kind of had several nails in their we did not do anything that caused their demise, regardless of what other people try to tell you. They had contract problems, they had other problems. So we just felt we needed to start fresh, and that's what we did. And most of the people that came with us did not come from Lunacon. We have a few. There was a few people that we had brought in with us to try to work with Lunacon. Those people came back with us, but there wasn't people that were traditionally associated with that convention.
okay. That explains some other things.
Yeah,
in my head, yeah.
one of the things that we were trying to do, and it is to try to change the corporate culture that had been going on there. There was a kind of a culture thing that there was like a 20-year argument going on, that people would just keep having that same argument. We wanted that to stop. We wanted people to treat each other nicely and try to be kind to each other. And that was a lot of what our goals have been in starting another convention, to try to change that the prior corporate culture.
Mhm.
Yeah. Russ, how
Yeah.
does this fit into your convention experiences?
Well, it sounds familiar. FinCon has been doing okay. We're I think we're having a little bit of aging of our staff, and we're trying to always look for newer people to come in, but at the same time, we're pretty stable right now. Where the story that I have is with the second convention, which we started and had to close, which was called Who Fest. We were trying to do it on the model of Gallifrey One, where we would have a small Doctor Who convention. The first time we did it, Who Fest 1, was awesome because guests. We lined it up with the 50th anniversary. We had $20 memberships. And as the height of the whole thing, we showed the 50th anniversary special as it was shown on the BBC in the big ballroom with all 1,000 people watching it all at once. And it was amazing. Everybody loved it. And they went, great, when is Who Fest 2? And we made money. Who Fest 2, we started bringing some guests in. We didn't make as much money because got to make sure and get enough people in to pay the autograph minimums. And we didn't have quite enough people in. So we were trying to advertise and advertise and advertise. Who Fests 3 and 4, we really lost money. And the problems were twofold. One is just the cost of getting people in from the UK. And the higher level guest you get, the higher your autograph guarantee is going to be that you're going to have to pay out if they don't make it. But also the kids that were coming in, the younger people that were coming in loved it, and they had a great time during the day, but they didn't get hotel rooms. And our deal with the hotel was they needed rooms. And so we hit our attrition clause and we had to pay the hotel. So at that point, after the 4th year, as treasurer, I recommended, no, we just have to stop. We don't have these kind of deep pockets to keep doing this. And we're treading on the gate shows that are inviting these same sorts of guests, and they do have the deep pockets, and we're going to be in direct competition with them as long as we continue trying to do this. So we stopped it and just said, it's done, sorry. We've actually sold the name to another group that it does have deeper pockets, and they're going to try to reinvent it as something that's more along the lines of sort of a British pop culture convention.
Such an interesting concept, selling the
so,
names.
yeah,
We
but
don't do that on the East Coast.
we did that. So it was a great convention, and people were really sad to see it go. But at the same time, it was not sustainable in any way. And I was really, really worried that it was going to kill FinCon along with it, because we were pulling from the same bank accounts, and you just can't do that.
Yeah, let me talk briefly for people who don't know certain aspects of the Boston history of convention, the rise and fall, et cetera, of Boscone and Aresia. A number of years ago, the early 80s, we had enormous Boscones. They're sometimes called the Winter World Cons, until what you could call the Boscone from hell, which broke our hotel. And at that point, we had to move out of Boston area and try to limit the number of people. And we had something like 4,000 people signed up and another 2,000 people ghosting the convention, and it was chaotic and awful. And there was even an emergency CIFOR meeting held at that particular Boscone to tell the people who were on the program, please don't leave. Yeah, anyway. So in response to us having to cut back and moving out of Boscone, the nest for Boscone, Aresia started up. And Aresia originally started up in direct competition, basically trying to kill Boscone. And the relationship has changed an awful lot since then, but that was the first sort of thing. And Aresia started growing, and everybody loved Aresia. It was a more open convention, more pop culture convention than Boscone. Boscone walks a very strange line between RitaCon, which is, CIRCon, LitCon convention, and Aresia, which is a much more wide open type of thing. But at any rate, because we're out of town and we had some very bad publicity and Aresia was growing, Boscone numbers started to fall. Okay, so maybe we should have finished it off then, but we didn't. We decided we could kind of keep on pushing. We have history, we have tradition, and all that. We eventually got back into Boston. At this point, Aresia is up to 4,000 people or so itself. We're down maybe about 600-700 people. And at that point, we started changing the convention bit by bit. We got some new people in to help with program. We're up to maybe 1,300 people now. The problem is that the people in the club, many of them are really no longer working on the convention. I'm part of program. I haven't been a member of Nashville for at least 5-6 years. There's only one person on program, which is one of the things that we really do a good job on at Boscone, who is in the club itself. This isn't really a healthy thing, okay? So, and as I mentioned, on top of it, Aresia has hit a number of bad times between some hotel issues that's come across and some of their own corporate culture that's chewing them up alive. We are now at a more stable number, except that it's harder to run the convention. We have another convention in the area that is potentially could take this over. Do we want to do that? Do we want to maintain our identity? What do we do? What would you do in a circumstance like that? It's something to think about. So with the permission of my other people, if somebody wants to get or offer suggestions, this would be a good time to do it.
Yes, and online as well.
And if they have conventions questions, tell us, okay? Oh, we have an unstable internet connection.
It pops up every once in a
Oh,
while.
okay.
It's telling us we're all unstable.
Yeah,
We do that,
most people who are really responsible and could put their ego behind them for a while for the sake of the convention. Like, if you don't want me to do program, I won't do program. If you want me to do something else, depends on what it is, but I will be willing to change things around. And yes, there are the troublemakers at conventions who refuse to change or only want to do things a certain way. That's unhealthy. Yeah, Judy.
My memory of Aresia starting was one of the things that Boscone cut when they had to move out of town, was costuming. We don't have a masquerade anymore.
No,
We've never had
masquerade in
since.
years.
No, that was when it got cut.
What? No, masquerade was cut 2 years before that.
Was it? Okay.
They probably did not want hall costuming at that point, but it wasn't that we were cutting the masquerade. That was cut before.
Okay. Anyway, Boscone as it currently is now, and I live in Florida and I'm the treasurer this year. There are like 5 or 6 big department heads that aren't in Boston anymore that are running departments. Art show, dealers, con suite, staff den are all being not run but with any Boston staff.
Yep.
Head staff.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And yeah, I see this as a problem.
Real problem.
They had to twist my arm to get me to agree that the treasurer job would be done well with me not living in Boston. And I don't see a problem. And I don't think it's a case of that Boscone has had a brain drain. I think people have aged out of the jobs.
I think that's a piece of it. I agree with you, Judy, and because they've aged out of the jobs and we haven't recruited enough new people, it's a whole combination of that going on there. As I mentioned, there's really maybe 5 or 6 people up in the Boston area who are working their butt off. I've chaired 4 Boscones and I care a lot about the convention, but there are times when I want to just say, forget about it. It's just not worth the effort anymore to work with these people who aren't doing anything, who want you to do the job for them. I tried to get the Boscone back about 10 years ago. I think it was Boscone 50. I'm not sure where we are right now, to sort of say, let's just do a big, okay, so it's about 20 years ago, to just sort of say, hey, enough with this. Let's have a big blowout and invite all of the guests we've had who are still alive from all the years we've done this convention and have a last Boscone. No, we can't do that. That would be bad. So instead, it feels like we're fizzling out over the lack of competent staff. And the chance that collapsing Aresia gives us also might mean we're not really holding a Boscone anymore, but we have now been flipped over to something. It's a very interesting potentiality here. We might have a convention with people who are there available to run it. It's no longer our convention, whatever that means, a place that some of us have been trying to balance for years. Or we might not have a convention that we can sustain. So it's an interesting, I wish Dave McCarty were here because he was going to talk about what he had done with Capclave in terms of reviving a convention. That involved practically funding it for a whole year. At least we don't have the money problems, but he had to fund it for a year. Yes, sir.
I was to say for those online, Fred Bauer, that following very closely the whole Boston thing back and forth. One thing I've observed, I've been in fandom for a long time, gaffeated for a while. Coming back into it, I think a big thing, if you have a convention that you want to keep a going concern, and Balticon did this, is specifically actively recruit newer, younger folks. You know, I got into it when I was in high school and college. I was excited. I was helping, got tech going in a big way in the East Coast area.
That's why we still have a program, by the way, because we did recruit one person who stopped.
Right, and that's what, you know, that's what Balticon actively did, is get the younger folks in there. And they could be college, they could be, you know, 30s, but the younger people, the more diverse people, that's what Aresia has going for it, is they have a very diverse cast of characters, for better or for worse, but really gives them the breadth and the people to come in with new ideas and to keep things going. So if your desire is to keeping a long-running convention going, I think the only thing is you have to go after the younger folks, bring them in, let them learn how to do your jobs. Absolutely, your point of bringing on an assistant to the divisions, I think, is key. You can't just pick okay, we're kind of swapping divisions this year, so you're going to do, I'm going to do your job, you're going to do mine. That's not going to work. You have to bring in the new people, teach them how to do it. A lot of conventions, the con chair is assistant the year before. Balticon runs that way.
We do.
A
We
lot
did
of
that.
conventions run that. Maybe you need to look at the division level of, okay, you're gonna do programming next year. You're gonna be my assistant this year, and look at it at that lower level to bring that people in and bring in the new ideas and the energy to keep it
That
going.
has worked successfully with one or two parts of the convention, bringing new people in, making sure they could do their job. But I guess we just haven't been very good at recruiting, and it's something that we have a good opportunity to that may be coming up that we have to handle right. The thing is, somebody new comes in, you give them responsibility right away, in which case there's a possibility that they don't do it right or the way you want them to, or you kind of frustrate them and make them sort of wait for a year or so before you give them responsibility, which can annoy the hell out of them.
We have an online question.
Okay, let me just finish up on that point. I think at some point you have to take a risk. I mean, these are fan-run conventions. These are not professional conventions. You're not, you're not going to piss off the big star if you do something wrong. Pardon me. But I think you do have to take that risk. How much responsibility? It may be a personal thing, etc. But if you're going to keep it going, I mean, if you're not going to take the risk, if you're trying to revive something that's failing, well, not taking the risk, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
You're just as good off taking that risk. And if it fails, it's the same end. So something to think about.
Yeah, I agree very much. It's trying to decide for the people who are in power, or to do it. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to read the question
could
that
you?
just
Yeah,
came in
thank
from Marguerite. It says, how do you make space for the more experienced who still want to be involved while also making the space for newer, fresher volunteers? If people don't want to step down because they don't want to not be involved, how do you balance those needs? How do you decide what's best for the convention, including if that means folding?
It's a good question. I would say make them advisors.
Yeah, that's
That
what I was
is-
going to say.
yeah.
You bump them upstairs and give them a more senior directorial position if they're up for it, and then that way you can give the newer people the more standard
Hands-on.
department head kind of positions,
Yeah.
and see how they do. Now, not everybody is going to be managerial. I've learned that. But at the same time, if this person really has learned their job well, then they should be able to direct somebody doing that job that's junior.
There's a thing that I used to do when I needed someone to take a year off, and we would comp them into the next year, and we would and part of the reason for doing that is because you have a built-in advisor that way, because you haven't hopefully you haven't alienated the person. They're still welcome at the convention. They're still part of the convention. If the new person doesn't work out, you still have the originally experienced person as well. But part of the thing is that you have to make the more experienced people feel that there's a place for them somewhere in the convention. You're just not trying to show them the door, because that's not hopefully what you're trying to do. And and there might be a case where someone is not working out, and that's a totally different conversation. But you have valuable people that you want to keep valuable. You assure them that there's a place with them in the convention somewhere.
Yeah. For this particular convention for SMUFCon, I ended up being pretty much the advisor to the person running the program, who had never done program before. And I sort of worked with her. It was great. It's like, this is the sort of things you have to do. So I told her, and then we sort of worked together, put some things together. I went off on a vacation. She continued working, did a very nice job. There are some things I would have done differently, but I think by being in that kind of advisory condition, sometimes people just want the ability to get their opinion in, but some people are doing it on a straight ego boost. So you got to find something that satisfies both needs. Yeah.
Mhm.
No, I'm just thinking we're talking a lot about the Pacific Northeast right now.
The Pacific Northeast, the Northeast.
I'm sorry, the Atlantic Northeast. Sorry. The Pacific
That's
Northwest
That sounds
actually.
like an interesting place to go. I go ahead.
I got to think, concentrate, but on the West Coast, I've seen 2 conventions fail. They were supposed to be genre conventions, and I think a lot of it had to do with some toxic personalities that got involved. Like, for instance, in Convolution, that one tanked simply because people weren't getting along. And some of the board members just decided this is not worth it anymore. And they were willing to put their own money into folding that corporation so they wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. We had another one, Silicon, that dwindled away. Most Archie could tell you about that one, but I don't know. For what it is, I mean, it used to be probably the most popular convention in the Bay Area, but it's had its personality issues as well. But it's struggling along, and
there's no shame in stopping a convention. And that's one of the interesting things, that people want to keep this convention running because it's their life, it's their thing, it's their part of their identity. So somehow just sort of saying, we're just going to stop it, we're going to cut it off, it's enough already. There are a lot of people who can't deal with that concept.
But in the meantime, though, AnimeCon, which just is the same weekend as BayCon, probably snatched up a lot of the people that probably would go there, because there would be nothing else to do that weekend. But BayCon has always been against a gaming convention, and they actually, from what I understand, these people will go to BayCon for the nightlife, and they'd go to some place like Fanime for the programming, and then of course there's, I call it WozCon, Wozniak's convention. It's actually, if you want to be technically correct, it's the Silicon Valley Comic Convention. I still think of it as WozCon. They're picking up big numbers, so there's obviously fandom in the Bay Area, and that's how I got involved in fandom, was through the media, the old Star Trek conventions. Those were primarily media, and I don't know. I mean, fandom used to be such a vibrant place in California, but the passion in California fandom just seems to be
these days running a convention in this fragmented convention scene, where the big media conventions can bring in things that are very exciting at a small local convention you can't do. An anime convention, you could have round-the-clock anime, which maybe somebody whose primary interest is in that. Well, a small regional convention can't do the same thing. It's a sort of a plus and a minus. If we use these media conventions to feed into the smaller regional conventions, that would be cool, but it's just the opposite is happening, that they're sucking people into their large conventions. Yeah.
I just mostly wanted to comment in that an honestly fairly successful case of picking the right time to fold a convention was BronyCon in Baltimore. It was a convention that had been running probably about a decade or so, dedicated to the revived My Little Pony fandom from the release of Friendship is Magic and all of that. And I worked it twice, like at a vendor booth. And honestly, some of the nicest fans I've ever met. Really, really lovely people. Crazy passionate about it. And, I think I mean, I don't watch the show. I think season 4 came out. I think that was going to be it and everything. But I was there. I was vending when they made the announcement that 2019 was going to be their last year. When they realized, because they were seeing the demographics in their hotel reservations and their registrations, and they said, we're going to go out on a high note. And honestly, they did a great job with
And
it.
that's nice.
That's good. I like it
So,
when they
I
go
mean, sometimes like one of the nice things, at least with these very genre focused conventions, is being able to sort of read, the signs coming in and deciding, time to do this.
We've done enough.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I just wish more conventions would realize that. I've done enough. Let's do a fabulous last convention. And,
Yeah.
we'll do as much
Yeah.
as we can,
That's my
put all of
point.
our remaining funds in there, work our butt off, make this something to remember. But people will instead struggle and push and why is that, besides the ego boo or the feeling of identification and the need to somehow keep a failing convention going?
Yeah,
One
just in the time I've been going to cons since 1990, 91 maybe, I've seen probably 20 conventions that were closed and 4 or 5 that have opened and are still open. But the ratio really, when you look at it, I don't know if that's true across the country, but
Not so
it
much in the
seems like
Northeast, no.
it's fairly high ratio, at least in the Southwest area.
I think
sir.
one of the things, I don't know the West Coast that well, but my impression is that a lot of the sci-fi conventions started on the Northeast, so they're the older ones. And I think that's why you're starting to see a little more churn going on there. And because there's the conventions are aging out to some extent.
Yeah, I think also some of to my understanding, some of the West Coast conventions are for profit or corporate owned or something like that, as opposed to local conventions.
Yeah.
So as the money sort of starts drying up, it doesn't seem worth it to run this as a business anymore. But another question up there.
Well, has anybody run a convention where it's dying? So you take the balance you've got, you throw the kitchen sink at it, you have the monster going out of business party, and discover then you've got a going concern on your hands.
I think one possible would have been the DC convention that had lots and lots of problems, and not lots of them, none of them are making, and reimagined themselves and became Capclave, and it's now a successful convention. It's different than the prior convention was. It was Disclave went down and Capclave came up, and they're now one of the bases for Discon. But yeah, they have now a good running convention, it seems, and
when MCFI could no longer realize that we really couldn't run another WorldCon for a while because of the expense of our city, we started doing one-shots sort of thing. We did a SWAFCon, we did a costume con. I think it might be interesting to do other small one-shot conventions of different sorts. So, Tammy.
Starbase Indy last year had a sort of a crisis of leadership, and being very public about the fact that they were in crisis got a lot of people on board, and I think they came back this year and are in a better place. I know you were there, Kelly. Yeah. Nope. No, you weren't there. Okay. Like Indiana. Anyway, so it looks like that, they didn't have a big public going away party, but they did sort of say, hey, we're in trouble, and then being really public got them the support they needed.
Yeah.
And it seems like they had a successful convention this year from what I saw in the distance.
Yeah. So a lot of the problem we're talking about really comes down to staff. And I won't say staff burnout, because burnout's a whole different thing. It's like staff being unwilling to try new things sometimes, not doing appropriate recruitment, or being unwilling to do appropriate recruitment, not just not doing it, not willing to change, feeling undue ownership of the con. I mean, I don't think, question, why are you doing this? I think there was a question, there was a program item earlier in the convention like this, like who's doing this con? Are we doing it for us? Are we doing it for them? And a lot, depending on your decision on that, is how much you're willing to work for Other comments? Yes.
One thing that I've thought about, you have all these cons
Too
that
dry
are
in this
closing and
place.
we're not reusing their names. There's only a
Thanks. Well,
finite
I'll take
number of
both.
names that you can use that have a pun with the word con in them. And I think we have a naming gap we need to address. I don't know what to do about
No.
it. It's somebody else's problem.
Any other comments or questions? We can, we can finish this convention, this topic 5 minutes ahead of time. Talk about, can we reinvent this topic? No, or revive the topic. But I think then we can see that there are real issues, and a lot of it involves being able to give things to other people or allow other people to help or fix things. It's most often, even though it says on this particular précis, sometimes the question of money needs. Most cases of most of the local fan conventions, it's not a money issue so much as an inability to run the kind of convention we want to keep running.
I think it comes down to resources of some type or some combination of resources. So it could be a combination of staff burnout and money. If it was just money, but people were still fired up about it, they'd find some way to fix that. If it was just staff burnout, but they had plenty of cash, they'd find some way to fix that.
Well, they fixed the cash one with cut. What's the issue with them?
It could also be, lack of members. Well, if you're still fired up about it, we'll find some way to fix that. But it's usually a combination of reasons.
Yeah, I think the other resource to keep in mind is the venue, because the venue requirements can change over time.
Oh yeah, we almost had to shut down Boscone after
Yeah.
the Boscone from Hell because no
Yeah.
hotel within
Hotel wouldn't talk to you.
60 miles would talk to us.
Aresia last year moved hotels, and now when they're back, they're discovering drastically different conditions under which they'll be operating with the hotel in some cases.
And they don't, well, they'll do it this year.
Yeah.
But the one big problem is right now they've been unwilling, unable to get a new convention chair for the year after this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a big one.
That's
Yeah.
what, that's one of the big issues, but the hotel issues, one of the big issues was the management change in the Aresia Hotel. It used to be a Westin only, and now it's been taken over by Marriott.
By Marriott.
And
And it's changed the relationship.
and change it
top level.
completely.
Mhm.
And a lot of the things that were just the way that things were working are not working that way anymore.
But it's just, my point is, one of the resources to consider, you have people, you have money, you have the venue. And the venue can impact your ability to be an ongoing concern. And you
Yep.
have to say, are we going to pick up and move somewhere else? Are we going to say, we can't, there is nowhere else that would go that would
It's-
satisfy our needs?
Yeah,
and
I
our
would add one
demographic?
other thing. There's a corporate culture.
And
And if the
yes,
corporate culture is eating its own children, you have a problem.
well, that's the other one. Yes.
Yeah. Okay,
But that's not a resource so much as an internal struggle in my mind.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions up on the board or last moment things that people want to say?
There aren't. I thought I'd say this is sort of a wrapping up sort of idea and maybe a thought for future SMOFCons. What we tiptoeing up on is what is the natural lifespan and like the course of the lifetime of a convention. What does that look like? How do we recognize when we're getting close to the end here? And I mean, if you sort of look around the country, you find a lot of conventions that hit 50 and maybe they threw a big blowout party for 50 and are now limping along in this, we're not actually willing to give it up. And I'm not saying that like 50 is the magic number or that that's the right
Yeah,
number for
it's
everybody,
changed very much
but
with
that
Boston.
there is some sort of natural arc of what, a convention gets started and we peak in like, what does that look like? And how can we as con runners recognize those signs and be more aware about maybe helping everything end gracefully rather than having a bunch of conventions where you go, oh yeah, that one, they're not doing their thing so much anymore.
Yeah.
Or reinventing the convention so that it becomes vibrant.
Yeah, and we've done that a couple of times, but it looks like we're in a spiral right now that I don't like at all. And we'll see what happens. Who knows what's going to happen. So thank you very much, my fellow participants and the audience.
Thanks, everybody.
And if you want to try